Live from the SABC's Auckland Park headquarters, welcome to this week's last episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight...
The first 3 months of this year were violent, brutal, and unsafe for many South Africans.
A set of horrific crime statistics. We go beyond the numbers to bring you reflections from seasoned activists. And with Child Protection Week about to end, we look at the 6-point plan to eliminate the scourge of child labor. All that and more in tonight's edition of The Watchdog, which starts right now. Police Minister Bheki Cele says the response he got from provincial commissioners as to what went wrong in the first 3 months of 2022 is unsatisfactory. This after contact crimes like murder, attempted murder, and sexual offences spiked unabated. The murder rate went up by 22.2% and rape increased by 13.7% in the country. Cele was releasing the quarterly crime statistics in Pretoria.
Between January and March this year, 10,818 people were raped, 6,083 people were murdered, 6,575 people experienced assault GBH, and 5,402 cars were hijacked. The most vulnerable in society, women and children, were not spared, with 898 women murdered and 306 children murdered from January to March this year. Kidnappings also saw a jump in Gauteng and Mpumalanga, with 1,563 and 1,000 cases reported respectively. Police Minister described the first 3 months as brutal, violent and unsafe.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first 3 months of 2022 have unfortunately been marred by more murders, more sexual violence, and more assaults compared to the same time period in the previous year. All in all, these statistics don't give us a good picture.
The Eastern Cape had the highest per capita rape in terms, recording 27.6 per 100,000, Free State 24.2 per 100,000, Northern Cape 20.4 per 100,000, and Northwest 18.5 per 100,000. The rest of the provinces can be observed from there, and Gauteng had the lowest in terms of per capita with 14.2 per 100,000.
Umlazi and Inanda police stations in KwaZulu-Natal recorded the highest murders. Mamelodi East police station in Gauteng saw the most carjackings, followed by Harare police station in the Western Cape. Cash-in-transit robberies increased by 26.2%. Minister partly attributed the ever-increasing violent crime on the shortage of police officers at stations. The National Police Commissioner says they've embarked on a crime-combating operation since April this year, and he expects it to yield some results. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Pretoria.
The overall increase in crime statistics between the period January to March this year has members of Parliament's Police Portfolio Committee reeling. Police Minister Bheki Cele and his team this morning briefed the Portfolio Committee before addressing the media and going public.
It's not a pretty picture. Please say South Africa is a crime scene. Between January and March, 10,818 rapes were reported, while over 6,000 murders were committed. Of that figure, 223 were children. MPs are calling for further interrogation of the causes for the high stats. There was also a call by the DA for Police Minister Bheki Cele to step down. The committee agrees more oversight of SAPS is needed.
The overall increase of 9.3% in the reported crime statistics is a serious concern. This committee has to take note of it, and I think that our response to this has to be firm, and I think we need further oversight on this matter.
Our country has become a crime scene where kidnapping has increased by over 100% year to year. This is an absolutely shocking crime statistic. Murder up over 20%, sexual offences up. It's a bloodbath, Chairperson.
Especially when we look at crimes against women and children. We are crying every day, but it seems as if we are failing. The criminals are winning.
What is most disturbing for me, Chairperson, is when we come to women and children, where, for instance, the murder of children with an increase of 37.2%, and on women, 17.5%. Now, if we look at the figure of children, I say it's most disturbing.
It would be an understatement to say we are disappointed. The stats, these crime statistics, indeed are a clear indication that the police are losing the fight against crime. And it would not be helpful to be told that the police are not losing the fight against crime. The figures speak for themselves. They are very, very disturbing.
MPs across the board have agreed that another meeting to analyse and address these figures is necessary. They say they also have to strategise to see how they as Parliament can assist the SAPS. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
For some reflections, my guests for this evening are Andy Gawa, who is an activist and author of the book Kwanele, Enough, about her struggle following a rape incident back about 12 years ago. And on the line, we have Lisa Verton, who is a gender activist, scholar, and researcher. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time.
Good evening.
Lisa, I'm going to start with you, if I may, and I'm going to start with the second package we played was of members of Parliament's Portfolio Committee, the Watchdog Committee on Police. Everyone expressing outrage, that these statistics have gotten out of hand. Clearly, the police aren't doing their job, and so on. But it is their job to see to it that, where police aren't doing their job, they make sure that, no one gets to rest. I don't know what you make of the outrage of what is supposed to be a watchdog committee that has actually seen these numbers over and over again, quarter after quarter.
Yes, I mean, I think with the greatest of respect to the committee and the police as well, is that there is some very troubling misunderstandings of statistics going on. I mean, one of the things that's really important when you look at statistics is you can't... So what the police have done this time around is they've compared this period, January to March 2022, with January to March 2021. And that period, they've come up with this increase of 13%. However, if you compare this 3-month period to the previous 3-month period of October to December of 2021, then actually the number of rapes has declined in the fourth quarter. If you add up the entire number of rapes over all 4 quarters, from April 2021 to March 2022, then rape is much lower than it's been for a number of years. It adds up to 41,695 rapes reported this year, in comparison to 2012-13, when 48,408 rapes were reported. So what we are seeing is fluctuations over quarters, which are often seasonal variations. You often see, and this goes with spring, summer, and socialization. You often see rape increasing over your summer months and then decreasing during autumn and winter. So we can expect in the next 2 quarters to see a decrease in the statistics again. But because they're not looking at this at researchers, I think they're creating outrage that has no basis for understanding and therefore asks the wrong questions. So I think that's what we need to do, is take a step back and analyze the statistics properly and look at them as trends. What are the trends telling us? And on that basis, you then determine strategy. And the equally important that they're not question that they're not asking in all this outrage is, what's happening to the number of arrests that the police are making? What's happening to the number? What's the quality of their investigation? So what are the percentage of cases that are proceeding to court? And then the question they should also be asking, because you're talking about a criminal justice system, is what percentage of cases actually get put down to trial, and then what number actually result in convictions? Then we'll have a much better picture, I think, of police performance and the criminal justice system. But if you don't use statistics properly, you're going to just have the situation of outrage, anger, fear, and panic, and then not generating the appropriate strategies in order to try to understand the problem and put in place the right and more effective kinds of strategies.
Should we not be angry, though, Melissa? The numbers are just astronomical. Even if we're recording declines, but the numbers are just very high.
The numbers are very high. South Africa is a violent country. We cannot get away from that. And I think what is very, very concerning is murder. Murder is not on the decline. Murder has been on the increase consistently since 2011-12. And murder should worry us a great deal, because before 2011-12, we had seen a 10-year decline in murder. That has reversed. So we should be extremely concerned about murder and employing much better thinking about what we do about it. When it comes to rape, I think we should be starting to think about, how do we use statistics more effectively? Why is it that the Eastern Cape is recording these increases? What is going on in Lusiki, Delft, and Umlazi, and in Nanda, that they consistently increase high rates of rape? That's where we should be focusing our attention, to understand what's going on there. What do we need to change there? Because here we can see a real emergency. Actually, emergency is the wrong word. It's become normal because those stations have been recording the highest levels for a good 8 years, but we're not seeing them coming down. We're not seeing people going to say, what's going on here? So I think rather than reacting with outrage, the time has come to say, where do we need to focus? Where do we need to fine tune? Where are we finding the problems? What can we go and do in those places to bring those figures down there? Because the rate of rape is not equal across the country. And so I think we've got to put much more effort into those parts of the country where it's just not coming down and is incredibly high.
Andy, the police minister says he's not happy with the answers that the provincial commissioners have given him. What do you make of that?
I think that the Minister of Police, as the chief executive of the various regions, should be on top of things and should have more understanding about what is happening on the ground. It cannot be that the regions will operate without leadership. So I think that we need to see leadership coming from the Minister of Police.
You think it's deflecting?
Yes. And seeing leadership coming from him and seeing strategies that he's going to employ to actually turn around this dysfunctional system. As Lisa has said, I think that we need to be looking at where are the cases, how many cases are being reported, how many go through for trial, how many convictions do we have? Because that is when the system will be working, so that perpetrators understand that there is punishment that meets the crime that they do. You know, rape is a serious crime as murder or heists or whatever. But I don't think that it is taken at ground level by police in terms of action when they have to deal with this with the same urgency that these other crimes are doing. So I think that we need leadership from the minister, and that leadership will give guidance to how the different regions operate, to how the benchmark, they must have a benchmark of what is a working police station. What does it mean? What do the police do? How do they handle the cases? Is there a case management process? Is there a time frame management process so that the cases can go through the production like you do in a factory?
In other words, I mean, a case has to be made for those who are failing us. In other words, those whose job it is, to deal with the criminals, to investigate the cases, to listen when people go to lay complaints. These people are actually failing us. And it takes me to actually the case you recently won at the Constitutional Court, because at the heart of it all, it is about those who can actually do something but don't, being brought to book, isn't it?
It is, yes, it is very important to have accountability. I think that accountability needs to start from the policeman at the bottom. And it goes up in a chain to the head of the police, to the investigators, to the prosecutors, and goes through the judiciary system. And we do not see that here. So I think that South Africa needs to relook at their system because it is not working. A production plant has an order in which things have to move so that at the end of the chain, there is a packed goods or packed box of biscuits or whatever you call it, whatever you may be producing. So I think that even with cases, they should be taken like that. They must be managed. There must be time frames. Actually, police also have a duty to the victims to inform them of where their cases are, what is happening, and what I've found with the people who call me, and also in my experience, you are assigned an investigator and you never hear from them. And one day you hear that your case was closed. So there are many rape victims out there who are walking around with case numbers that have been closed a long time ago, but they're not even aware of it. So it means that the system is not working because the plant is not working properly.
And I mean, in your case, for example, you ended up doing the work of the police, were it not for meticulously writing down every problem you encountered as you got them to attend to your case. Were it not for that, they would not have been exposed. And in April, the Constitutional Court, in all likelihood, would not have, ruled in your favor when you took on the police for not doing their job. And it's not everyone who will take, notes the way you did and put a very, solid record of what happened to you in order for you to then, be able to get justice at the end of the day. And what you're saying is that it is the duty of the police, it is the duty of the investigators, it is the duty of the courts, everyone along the chain to actually do their jobs.
Yes, unfortunately, the victim is dependent on the prosecutor and the investigator for their case. The investigator is very key because he actually holds the key to justice to a victim. Because without proper investigation and proper files, your docket is not admissible in court, and you will not have a trial, and your case will be put down. And also your prosecutor needs to know, I think that I was in a conference about 3 years ago where prosecutors, it involved a different array of people from the police services. They were talking about their inundation with cases where when they go to court for a case of a victim, they've not even met that victim before. So what are they going to talk about? They have not understood their story, whereas the perpetrator and the alleged rapist gets a junior legal representative from legal aid or whatever, who is very feisty and wants to prove his worth. So the irony is that the perpetrator is much more equipped with a representation from a lawyer who just wants to prove his worth, whether the person raped or not, whereas the victim, who is supposed to be the one who actually has been is having good legal advice and so forth, is let down by the prosecutors. In my case, I never saw my prosecutor. They actually called me on the day of the case, of the suitcase. I was in Johannesburg, and my file says that. He calls me in Port Elizabeth and says, "Where are you?" And I'm asking, but who is this? Even the courtesy of proper greeting. And then he says, "We're waiting for you in court." And I said, I'm not aware I was supposed to be in court. And actually, I'm in Johannesburg and the court is in PE. He was not even aware of that fact, which is written on the docket. So how was he going to represent me without even knowing those basics? And that's not peculiar to me. It is something that is happening to most rape victims, whose cases become closed because I was not subpoenaed. They don't attend the court case and then they close it because they say, well, you did not attend the case. Whereas if at all the prosecutor could have read the docket, they would be aware that you were not even subpoenaed for this case. And the prosecutor and the magistrate also has to be more vigilant and diligent in saying, if there's no subpoena, this case needs to go back and come back another time. But because the system is broken, even the magistrate closes the case. So I think that the police system and the process of the justice system is broken and it needs to be fixed, because the reason why we have more cases, more people repeating, because some of the times the perpetrators are repeat offenders who are serial rapists or serial murderers, because they know there's impunity. There's nothing that's going to deter them for doing what they want to do.
Lisa, I mean, are the people at the top, who are supposed to be, fixing these problems, alive to the kinds of, things that Andy has just described? Are they even aware, of this kind of detail? Do they really take time to actually, familiarize themselves with what is happening on the ground, what people are experiencing, lived experiences, of victims and survivors?
If they paid attention to the news, they wouldn't be able to escape it. Because I think practically every week we have a case reported where somebody says they've been treated so badly. I think the very great difficulty with the police at the moment is that they've become very top heavy. They have far too many managers and not enough detectives and others in the charge office. And that's a real problem because it means that you've got possibly too many detectives carrying too many dockets, and obviously they're not going to do a great job when they're overworked. So I think we have to look very much at the police's ratio of managers to those who are doing the actual work of policing. We have to look at that kind of administrative detail to understand what's going wrong with the police. So the fact that they don't analyze the statistics properly is deeply, deeply concerning because it means that they're not understanding the nature of the problem and how they could use information in order to intervene more effectively. That really does worry me. It also concerns me when you have the MPs demanding that the police reduce rape. That's a very difficult thing to do. If you look at the fact that almost half of rapes were committed in someone's home, how are the police going to prevent that? Are we really asking the police to place somebody in everybody's home? So you see, if you don't, that's what I mean is they're not looking at statistics to see how do we use the information to how do we intervene. And I think building up on what Andy is saying is where the police need to be putting most of their energy is in doing much better investigation and far better reception of complainants, giving them good service in the client service centre. The area we need to focus on in terms of prevention is really the police's capacity to catch serial rapists, because those are crimes they can prevent. So we need to be able to know what is their capacity to pick up and rapidly identify that a serial rapist is in operation, what's happening with our DNA database, and I mean, we all know the problems and backlogs with that. So if they don't sort that out, then they're not preventing what they can prevent. And then they're not doing what, as Andy has pointed out, what they should be doing, which is providing far better quality policing services in order to those who come and report charges. Because when people sit and listen to this and hear how somebody gets dealt with, and they hear their cases don't go to court, there are two options. One is they may decide, I'm not going to bother, it's just not worth it. Or you may see an increase in vigilante action where the community decides, we can't trust and believe in the police any longer or the criminal justice system. We're going to sort this out in our own way. And I mean, we had the whole Khayelitsha Commission of Inquiry 10 years ago now that was asking precisely these questions. And I'm not even sure if the problems that were identified there, like the inadequate number of detectives to the ratio of people who live in the area, has even been addressed. So, we've got a lot of managers, but they don't seem to be doing the proper kind of management and administrative work, like looking at what is the ratio of police officers to people. And I think in many areas, in townships in particular, because they have much larger populations, they suffer from apartheid histories where there weren't enough police officers or even stations anyway. I don't see that they've necessarily done the kind of matching to ensure that stations where you have a lot of people are getting far more detectives in order to be able to investigate the number of crimes that are being reported. So, I think management really does need to look very carefully at itself, because this is clearly where some of the problems are lying. And it also, I think we've seen all the problems recently as well about corruption within the police, the appointments of people who are not suitable to the positions. That's where the police really need to start cleaning up.
Andy, I mean, the other day, I had guests who were members of policing unions. This is after a survey that was undertaken some months ago, where they were complaining about the morale of the police. They were complaining about what Lisa has just spoken about, where underqualified, or people who are not qualified altogether, were being given positions or promoted or employed in jobs that they are not qualified for. But they were also talking about problems that the men and women in blue are experiencing, like have been exposed to death or being exposed to horrors. In many instances, their own safety being threatened, some of them dying even. And what all those things, the impact that all those things have on the few because everyone agrees that we don't have adequate numbers of police, in this country. So the few who are there, many of them can't do their jobs because of all these problems.
Yes, I would. I think that I would agree that the police have a tough job to do under difficult circumstances because of numbers and work overload, and the psychological trauma of experiencing trauma of other people who come to you. You know, I think that the president and the Minister of Police, I think in the last 3 years, you know, with Wenene and other cases, they have talked about rape as being a third pandemic. But it's been a pandemic before COVID came. If we look at the response that we had with COVID, where we said as a country, everybody has to protect each other. I think that South Africa needs to have, as a society, a zero tolerance against gender-based abuse, starting at home. It must not be supported by the mother who sees the father abusing the daughter or the son. Much as it may be difficult to move out of your house, there are many reasons why women stay in these toxic relationships and women keep quiet whilst their children are being abused. But I think that we need a strategy where, as a country, we are looking at all pockets of society to have zero tolerance against gender-based violence. And that also has to include the police. It must be a mantra of the country. We can't talk about a pandemic and not do anything about it.
Isn't that, Lisa, what South Africans, what puzzles many South Africans? The fact that the president, the ministers, everyone talks about gender-based violence. And I don't think there has been the sort of level, of attention from an awareness, but also a talking about the problem point of view, But where there's a disjuncture, you're still seeing these high numbers, and no one seems to be able to put a finger, on it as to why it is that at this point in history, at a point where we are talking about these things more than we have ever, I think, spoken about them before. The levels of awareness, are there much higher, perhaps, than they have ever been, in this country. Yet, we are seeing these very high numbers.
I mean, I think, Vuyo, you've put your finger on it, which is that you highlight what I think is the key problem, is this mistake we make that the only reason men, and it's predominantly men who rape, that the only reason they rape is because they don't know that it's wrong, that they're not aware that rape is a problem. I'm sorry, I can't even begin to say how mistaken that is. And so we consistently, time and time again, focus only on awareness programs, as if the only reason men rape is because nobody has ever said to them it's wrong. That is nonsense. Many of them do know it's wrong. They know very well it's wrong. That's why they run away and hide themselves and beat up victims afterwards and do all they can to conceal themselves. They know it's wrong. What we need to be understanding is what are the reasons that lie beneath that, which we are not getting to. And I think there are a couple of things that we have to take into account. And, you know, these are the kinds of things government may not necessarily want to admit, because then they have to look at themselves very hard. It's very clear, and I spoke about murder as the example, it's very clear that between the 1990s and about 2010, there was a definite decline in murder, and you could also see a decline happening in rape. That reversed, it's very clear when you start looking at the statistics over a 10-year period, that reversed when Jacob Zuma came into power. And so the amount of effort that went into state capture, that went into eroding and breaking the police and the prosecution service, has obviously spilled over into the police's capacity to investigate and the prosecution's ability in order to prosecute. You can see it also, I think, in the court statistics. Although the NPA is saying that they're scoring these very high percentages of cases that result in conviction, if you look at the number of cases that they are actually putting down to trial, it's fewer than they were putting down about 10 years ago. So and I don't think government really wants to admit it, that part of this is a problem that they've inflicted on the country because of very poor choices poor is the wrong word, corrupt, improper choices in who was put in charge of the country. So obviously government is not going to want to admit that. They're going to want to look at other causes. So, I mean, I think we've got a very, very serious problem with our institutions. It's quite clear, and I mean, the July riots are an example. When policing breaks down, you have increases in violence, you lose your capacity to collect police intelligence, you develop backlogs at a DNA laboratory, you have very poor quality investigation. Those are deep and systemic problems which were put in place over a period of 10 years. They're not going to get fixed overnight, and government seems to be really struggling getting some of this right. So there are those big systemic problems that are not being tackled the way they should. You also have to look at things like social conditions. There is research that tends to suggest when times get tough economically, and we all know that South Africa right now is in a very tough position. We've just been through 2 years of lockdown, and before lockdown, we were already not in a great position. We've had the July riots. That one of the ways in which people can deal with adversity and difficulty is through violence. So that is going to be contributing something to the mix as well. So we are not tackling those particular socioeconomic conditions that make violence that much more likely. I mean, there's plenty of research that suggests that, especially for boys, that if they are badly treated in childhood, if they are beaten regularly, if they are neglected, one of the ways in which they deal with that when they grow up to become adults is to behave violently. And now we can see all these new studies that are telling us about rises in child malnutrition that we haven't seen in numbers of years, rises in child death, rises in child abuse. What are we creating in future? So, I mean, these are the big, deep, entrenched systemic issues that we are not tackling. And with the greatest of respect, standing up and saying, no, rape is wrong, GBV must stop, that just doesn't get to those kinds of problems. It doesn't address them at all. You know, it's like, as people have said before, it's like it's changing deck chairs on the Titanic. The ship is going down and you're fiddling with the cosmetic, superficial stuff. So I think the challenge to the police and to politicians as well, is to step back and say, this is what the research is telling us about what causes and what reduces violence. What do we need to do differently? And where do we need to start taking responsibility in order to fix the problem?
And added to what Lisa is saying, Andy, is the issue of consequences. You know, it can't be emphasized. I mean, there has to be consequences for those police officers or investigators who botch cases. There has to be consequences for people who are found to simply not have done their jobs.
Accountability is important at all levels. And I think that without accountability, people are actually working without a job description, because they are, or even if there is a job description, there is no assessment on performance. And I'm not sure whether the police do have performance measures in place around the way in which cases are being handled. So without accountability, anybody can do anything.
Well, let me thank both of you for coming through for us this evening, Lisa. Andy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vuya.
Thank you very much. Well, those are our guests for tonight on the back, of course, of those statistics that we saw that were announced earlier. The Minister of Police addressing Parliament first and then later on addressing the public via the media. Murder rate up 22.2% from what we're told. Rape has increased by 13.7% in the country. This is something has to give. This really has to stop. Up next, we talk about child labor, how we can eradicate that particular scourge. Don't go away.